Hey everyone, this is Lomi, and my latest project has been revising the modifications to Rune's knees. He's a weird hybrid doll, and while when I modified his legs previously he was able to stand, his knees were single jointed, which meant his legs only bent halfway. After I decided to dye the doll a tan color last year, I knew I'd have to strip the paint off his legs and redo it to match, so I figured that was a great time to figure out how to make his knees a double-ended joint. I originally tried a simple double-ended peanut joint, but it didn't work well with the angle of his fantasy legs. Ultimately, I decided the best thing to do was suck it up and design a new knee joint for the lower leg that would be compatible with the original Iplehouse hinge joint the old EIDs used. I spent a good number of days sculpting a knee piece that fit with the hinge and fit into the upper thigh the way the human leg did. The paper clay version fit a little loosely, but that's good since it'll shrink a bit once cast. Since I need two identical knee joints and I need them to be strong, I sculpted the master out of paper clay and then sprayed it with primer so I could cast two copies in resin. After the knees are cast, I'll be able to anchor them to the top of the fantasy legs using epoxy. Or at least that's the idea. Fortunately, my silicone from casting my Feeple 65 headbacks hadn't expired yet, even though it's close. It's really thick, but it worked well enough for what I needed. The top of the silicone mold cured with bubbles in it, but the mold itself turned out really well considering the silicone is on the verge of going bad. It's a high-strength silicone though, which means the parts are really difficult to demold. The stiffer the silicone, the more tear-resistant it is, but being stiffer also means it's much harder to get pieces out of the mold. The knee stuck really badly, but it turned out to be because the primer and paper clay fused with the silicone inside the string channel I drilled. That's not a problem, since it's paper clay, I can fill the mold with water to get that clay out of the mold before it's time to cast. The next challenge was stripping the paint off his fantasy parts so I could redo them. I knew this would be difficult because I had coated the parts with UV resin to make the paint extra durable. I was able to get the paint off the arms easily by soaking them in water to soften the UV resin, then wiping them off with Winsor & Newton brush cleaner. There's just a little bit of airbrush overspray left inside the joints that I still need to scrub out. But for some reason, when I did the same thing on the legs, the paint absolutely would not budge. I tried everything I could think to throw at it. I used straight acetone, I soaked them in brush cleaner, I tried using lacquer thinner, and I even soaked them for 2 days straight in simple green, which usually removes paint really easily. That paint would not come off. Eventually I realized why. When I painted the arms, all I used was regular sealant as a base coat. But when I painted the legs, which were heavily modified, I had coated them with my favorite automotive primer to even out the surface and help the paint adhere better to the modifications. As you can see, it clearly worked, because while the paint came off the unprimered arms without any difficulty, the acrylic on top of that auto primer was almost indestructible. Ultimately, the only choice I had left was sandpaper. I hate sanding because with the issues I have with my joints, it always leaves me stiff and sore for days, so I wasn't able to finish this project this week. However, the sanding got me back down to the gray primer super fast, and the primer mostly wiped off with acetone and brush cleaner. The remnants of primer don't matter, and the remnants of paint around the top of the leg will get sanded off when I put the new knee on with epoxy and then smooth it all out. After the mold had time to soak and the stuck paper clay came out, I mixed up some of my favorite Alumilite white resin and poured the knees. I kept some eye molds handy for the leftover resin because I've been casting stuff for some other projects I'll be working on soon. You might be able to guess what a few of them are from other things laying on my table. A few hours later, the resin was sufficiently cured and cooled, and while the middle part of the mold had made itself difficult again, I was able to pull a couple great quality bubble-free casts that work awesomely with the upper knee hinge. The hinge fits in really snugly, so I might sand it just a little to reduce pressure on the pieces to prevent cracks. But otherwise, it works great, and this piece should be exactly what I need. The last thing I need to do to complete the changes to the lower leg is carve out more of the back so the new knee piece can fit down inside the top of the leg at an angle. Because if the leg is too straight, it will affect the doll's center of gravity and he won't be able to stand. My shoulder hurting from all the sanding means I won't be able to finish this until next weekend at soonest, but if everything goes well, I'll be painting the new modifications then and we'll finally have this big guy ready for some new adventures. That's all for today though. Thanks for watching. Bye.